Minister, we welcome this piece of legislation. We've been campaigning for this piece of legislation for many years. Previous Ministers for Justice in your position said there was no need for it because of the 1989 Act, which was, as you've just admitted, ineffective. So we do welcome this debate and we do welcome this opportunity, and we welcome this piece of legislation, which we have to get right. I want to start on the positive. I've just come from the Irish Traveller Awards, Irish Traveller Movement Yellow Flag Awards that was in the Arc in Temple Bar. I saw all the children. Minister, if you want to have any hope, if any of us want to have any hope for the future, just go to a school, just engage in the Yellow Flag process, see what those children are achieving together, see what we can learn from them. It was just so inspirational, it was so emotional to see children from all parts of the country coming together, talking about their learnings, and living in an Ireland which is oh so much more rich and so much more exciting than the Ireland I grew up in. The Ireland I grew up in was stale and old and failed, and everybody wants to leave it. And now we have a country which is full of families who have come here to become Irish, to be Irish, to share this international experience. And it's facilitated by the Irish Traveller Movement. And I see Bernard Joyce is here in the gallery, and he's so very welcome to witness this debate. It is striking, however, Minister, I might say this much, is that the teachers of these children don't look like their children in their school as much as they should do. And the first interface of a child with the state is probably in their primary school, infants, maybe junior infants. And far too many of our teachers are not as diverse as the children that they teach. And we need to challenge that, and we need to rectify that. There's reasons behind that. We don't need to flesh them out here. But it has been said, hate comes from somewhere. Hate comes from ignorance. It comes from fear. It can come from poverty, but it's not always comes from poverty, because some of the most closed-minded people I've ever come across are the people who have most. And those who have most sometimes are most worried about losing what they have. And they have this perceived idea that equality is about taking from them the privilege that they have, and they have always had. And we need to challenge that as well. I do have, however, Minister, in terms of this legislation, great misgivings as to how this is being done, how this legislation is being managed. We were asked, as members of the Oireachtas, to submit our amendments yesterday, before the second stage debate, which was due to happen yesterday and is happening today. And that is not the way to do business. I raised this on the order of business myself. Yesterday, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform admitted that it wasn't best practice. Celeste Cancorda admitted it wasn't best practice, and I've written to the Cancorda to express my disappointment that if we're trying to amend a piece of legislation that we have to get right, because we've waited so long to get this right, that we have to do it in the proper way. So it's a demand of TDs to submit amendments to a bill before the second stage debate isn't the best way to go about it. It's been spoken about leadership, and I accept what other deputies have said in terms of political leadership. And yes, Minister, within these houses we have had voices who have not helped. We can't pretend that all of this hatred comes from anonymous online groups. We have to call it out for what it is wherever it happens. And it happens in this chamber. We have a TD who resides in this chamber who has said that asylum seekers are freeloaders, hoodlums and blackguards. We have another TD who speaks in this chamber who has said that asylum seekers and immigrants need to be deprogrammed. We've had members of your own party who have said that they won't deal with black Africans. And we've had the most disgusting, violent, appalling things said about the traveller community for as long as I've been involved in politics. And they generally get away with them. And they may have a small period of suspension from a political party, but there's always a readmittance. And that has to be called out, and that has to stop. So all of us in our own political entities, our own political groupings, our own political organisations have an absolute responsibility to call out hate and racism from wherever it comes from. And it's not good enough for us in the political system here to stand up and make speeches about how much we agree with ourselves about hate, how hate is terrible. Yet we sit in committees and we sit in chambers with people who are well versed in using language of punching down on vulnerable communities when they know they can get away with. And Minister, one of your own colleagues, who just happens to be the chair of the Education Committee, only 2 weeks ago described people in addiction as druggies. And he was speaking from about 2 rows behind you. So we all have a responsibility with how we manage the way that we speak. We have an issue with hate, and we have to understand hate, we have to define hate, and we have to work to eradicate it. and we have to understand where it comes from. And criminalising it is one way of doing it. But education is another aspect of what we have to speak about. But also, if somebody is guilty of an offence under this Act, we have to meet what everybody wants to happen. What the victims of such a hate crime wants to happen is that this individual won't re-offend. It won't happen again, that there will be a process where this person can understand as to how their hatred has led to a situation of such destruction, of such unhappiness, of such anger, of such pain. And we need to reflect on that, because what we don't want to happen is somebody who is convicted of an offence under this legislation then doubles down on their hatred, because there absolutely will be bad actors out there who will convince this individual who may be guilty of an offence that this is, political correctness gone mad. You've just been criminalised for something that was in your head, and this is what happens when progressive politics goes too far. And they will double down and they will commit themselves to a lifelong venture, potentially, of hatred. And we need to be mindful of that. And it is true in terms of what academics have spoken to us about and submissions that we've gotten as political entities and academics who have spoken to us, particularly from the University of Limerick. And I want to give great credit to Jennifer Schwepp and to Amanda Hines of the work they've done over 10 years, more, advocating in this space. And when somebody who has advocated for hate crime legislation for so long points out to deficiencies in the bill, you really have to take notice of what they're saying. You really have to take notice of what they're saying. Because in this, and we are anxious to get this legislation passed, but we can't rush it, Minister, because if we get this wrong, if we make a mistake, if there's a fault line in what we produce or pass, then there are well-organised, well-financed groups who will pick holes in what we have passed and use that to politicise, to radicalise, particularly young people and particularly young men. Because the Ireland that I grew up in was made for people just like me. It was made for white, middle-class, able-bodied, heterosexual men. It was made for us. We've always run this place. We see ourselves everywhere. When I was growing up, I saw people just like me in positions of power. The teacher, the guard, the person on television. All spoke like me, all looked like me, all sounded like me, were tended to be a white, middle-class, able-bodied, settled, heterosexual male. And if you walk around the walls of, or the halls of this esteemed building, you generally see people who just look just like me. So if you don't come from the background I come from, and if you don't have that experience of seeing people just like you in positions of authority, then you need the political system to work for you. It was interesting listening to the children this morning, and interesting listening to the presenter, Emer O'Neill, who she said that when she was small, when she was 6, and she's from an African background, her father's from Nigeria, she said she came to the conclusion when she was 6 that she just wanted to be different. She was dying to be different. She was dying to be different from what she was. She was dying to be the same as everybody else, because she was half African. And that's such a heartbreaking thing to hear any child think. So I suppose I'm coming back to the point here about the legislation and how we have to be so sure that if somebody falls foul of this legislation, that it's not something that is going to hang over their neck forever. It is possibly a potential for them to redeem themselves and to look differently about themselves and how they conduct themselves. So there is a difference, Minister, and we have to concede. We have to concede that there is a difference between a premeditated action, between somebody who is hate-filled and decides to organise in a premeditated fashion a hateful action of violence against a group or an individual that they hate because of their identity. There's a difference between that and somebody in the course of a criminal action is heard to utter something that is discriminatory. They are two very different things. And if we treat them similarly, then I think we're making a grave mistake. And we are possibly losing that second person for good in making that person a hate criminal, in so much as that person is now equated with the premeditated, organised individual. And I think we need to reflect on that. So that's why we feel so strongly about the amendments that we have put down, Minister. That's why we absolutely are determined to work with you and to ensure that this piece of legislation, which has been long sought for, is successful. So, Minister, in summary, let's learn from the children. Let's learn from the children. We had our chance. This is the country that we have effectively shaped at this point in our lives. They come from a different Ireland that I came from, and their Ireland is so much more exciting. It's so much fresher. It's so much richer. It has so much more talents. You would be so envious of the Ireland that they are growing up in, and that our own children are growing up in, versus the failed country, the absolute failed state that I grew up in, and I am envious of them. But I want them to grow up in a country that reflects them, and that when they see people of power, people of influence, role models in their community, that they look just like them. And we have to reflect on how many people of different backgrounds are in the Garda Síochána, are in politics, are in the teaching profession, are in other professions. How we can empower people to do that. We have to reflect on the comments that are made in chambers like this. I mean, it is quite rightly said that I think anti-traveller sentiment is, in too many political chambers, is given free rein. It is the last bastion of hatred which is almost given social acceptance. And that has to be challenged. And we have to do it in a chamber such as this. And those who will punch down need to be challenged in political chambers. And then, as we move forward, Minister, that it is not good enough for us to produce legislation which, in doing the right thing, we make a mistake in labelling somebody for doing something stupid or saying something stupid in the course of a criminal action, versus the person who has, over a period of time, demonstrated their hatred and their organisation around that hatred. And I think we have to be mindful of that, and restorative justice has been mentioned. So, Minister, with all those things in mind, this is what a republic does. This isn't about limiting free speech. This isn't about thought policing. This is about ensuring that every child that grows up in this country can feel at ease, can be themselves, that being themselves is enough, and that no child will ever, in that heartbreaking thought that would cross your mind, that a child at age 6 would actually look in the mirror and wish they weren't what they were. And wish they weren't what they were. And we have to ensure that every child that we have can grow up in a country that they're respected, and if it does come to a point where an organised hate group decides to undermine them, or an individual decides to undermine them, and that the law is there to protect them and to root that out. But we have our own responsibilities as well, and members of this Oireachtas need to know and be put on notice that we will be calling them out.